How's it going, guys? I hope you're all doing well out there today, wherever you are in the world. And in this video, I want to give you a guitarist guide to in-ear monitors. Now, with stage volume being kept lower and lower and a lot of people moving to either digital solutions or going direct, in-ear monitors are more prevalent than ever. And disregarding that entirely, in-ear monitors are a great way to protect your hearing when gigging. We've only got one set of ears on our head and we can't replace them. So in-ear monitors are becoming more important, not only for your experience playing, but also for protecting your hearing. Now, while there's a lot of information out there about in-ear monitors, there doesn't seem to be a great deal from a guitarist perspective. And us guitarists are a really funny bunch. We rely a lot on our sound and the feeling of an amp behind us and the feedback and interaction that we get from that. And moving to in-ears is a big change. It's a big step and it's a big adjustment period as well. And you know, we're used to hearing an amp on the floor more normally pointing more at the backs of our legs than it is our ears, and that's what we've gotten used to over the years. And then as soon as you put in-ear monitors in, if you're sticking a mic on that cab, you're basically pressing your ear against the speaker, and it's not a sound that we're particularly used to. So in this video, I want to go through the different types of in-ear monitor, what might be right for you, how to get a better sound in your in-ears, get more of that feeling in the room and things like that. So basically just going to try and break it down so you can get the best experience possible as a guitarist from in-ear monitors. So first, let's start with the different types of in-ear monitor that you can pick up. It's more affordable than ever to get really decent in-ear monitors. I've had some good experiences and some not so good with cheaper sets. This is my current cheap set, and it is a CCA C10 Pro set that I got off Amazon. They're quite stylish looking, to be fair. And these come in, I think, at around 45 or 50 quid. And if you get the right buds, these are a great starting point for getting into in-ear monitors. The buds are very, very important because it creates that seal around your ear. And that's going to be what increases bass response, stops outside stuff getting in. And that is sort of the key to making these cheaper ones sound better. Now, I've used these for a long time and I've recently moved to Moulds, which we'll get into in a minute. But these are perfectly serviceable. The thing I've noticed most about these are the top end is definitely hyped a bit, so they can sound quite brash. And like I said, the key to getting a decent bass response is having a good seal around your ear. So I opt for the foam buds, the sort of memory foam buds, but you can also get the more, what they call the more plunger types that are a better seal, but I find those personally quite uncomfortable. So it's worth, if you're going for a cheaper set, get a set of different buds that you can try that fit them to try and get the best fit possible. But like I said, main thing is with these cheaper ones, the top end is quite hyped. And the trouble is as well, when you're moving around, these foam buds are sort of expanding and contracting, and depending on how you move your head, the sound changes. So these aren't ideal, but they are a perfectly serviceable option. And I still use these pretty regularly for festivals and things where I know I'm going to have to be pulling them in and out depending on how good your monitor mix is. So these are the CCA ones, as I said, but there is also companies like KZ that offer great budget in-ear options. I personally haven't had very good luck with the cheaper Shure models. I think they're 215s possibly. I find that they're not great sound quality for me personally, and I also found them a little bit flimsy as well. I know a lot of people that have had them and they've broken. So personally, I would go for something like this because they have detachable cables. So if you see here, that's the main bud. You can then detach the cable and get a replacement one. I know a guy that I work with has got a very nice, very thick replacement cable for these. So this is a great starting point if you want to get into in-ears. So as I mentioned, I have recently moved to custom molded in-ear monitors. If my camera will zoom in, you can see there, that's a mold of my inner ear, and it's got some custom artwork on them. So these were made for me by a company called Lugs over in Northern Ireland. And Robert over there has been fantastic. I described exactly what it was that I wanted, what my situation was, and he recommended these Pro 4 models that he makes. And they've been absolutely fantastic. The things I noticed immediately moving away from the cheaper in-ears is how flat the response was. There was no spiky top end. If anything, I was adding a little bit of top end back in because I guess my ear's used to that hyped treble with the other in-ears. The bass response is unbelievable. It's compared to those where the rubber seal is what determines how much bass you get from them. These are a perfect seal every time. And the other thing is just the comfort of wearing them. You know, they're molded to your ears perfectly, so as you're moving they don't come undone or anything. It's a tight seal. They're really comfortable for a whole gig. And so it's been a big change, where starting with in-ears is a big change in itself. This was another big change because of the seal that you get. It blocks out so much external noise that it's a little bit disconcerting when you start. But if you're someone that wants to be in complete control of what you're hearing on stage, someone that stood next to a drummer, for example, Moulds are really the only way to go, in my opinion. Now, Robert over at Lugs has been kind enough to provide a discount code for these Pro 4 models. So if you're interested in getting custom molds made, I strongly recommend you check out Lugs, and I'll leave that discount code in the description below. So you've got your actual in-ear monitors sorted. How do you get that sound that you need for your gig into your ears? Well, first of all, you need some kind of headphone amplifier. If you're on a budget, I recommend a wired solution. So I keep one of these with my gear, which is a Behringer P1 personal in-ear monitor amplifier. It's got 2 XLR inputs and you can run it in mono or stereo. The reason I opted for this one particularly is it's powered by 9V DC. So what I do is I place this on my pedal board, connect up to the monitor send, and then I have a headphone extender which goes up my normal guitar lead and then into my in-ears, and then you've got a volume control on your pedal board. You can also get smaller ones of this sort of thing, which I think are called the Behringer P1, which are ones that you actually clip onto your belt. So if you wanted to go that way, that's another good option. If being tied to a cable is an issue for you and you've got a slightly bigger budget, then a wireless in-ear set is the way to go. So I use a Shure system that's mounted in my rack that I use for festivals and stuff. It's pretty good. I can't remember the exact model. It does the job. When I'm touring, we've got a full rack of Sennheiser G4 systems, which are fantastic. So I can strongly recommend the G4. These are really good too, the Shure ones, but I personally prefer the Sennheiser. And then obviously you need a battery in this side, and then you leave your sender, your main unit somewhere else, plugged in with your monitor send, and then you wear this on your belt and connect it up to your in-ears. So getting your particular choice of mix down the line to your headphone amplifier or wireless pack, most mixing desks have an auxiliary send. So what that is, each channel level, if you're using a hardware desk, will have an auxiliary level, auxiliary 1, 2, whatever. And that is just deciding which one of those channels and how much of those channels come out the auxiliary send and then into your in-ear monitors. The more advanced stuff, like the digital desks and that, have far superior ability to mix in-ears. So things like the Behringer XR, which isn't all that expensive, has these lots of auxiliary sends that are XLR outputs, which are great for utilizing with in-ears. And then you can normally do on your phone, you can set your monitor mix on your phone, check panning, all that sort of stuff. So digital, if you're a band that's running a whole rack of in-ears or everyone's on in-ears, I strongly recommend going down the digital route. You'll have much more control and you can obviously save settings and things like that. So you can decide exactly what you're hearing in your ears. At this stage, I just want to mention a few advantages to switching to in-ear monitors before we get into some of the pitfalls. Now, as I mentioned, it's great for protecting your hearing. We've only got one set of ears, you need to look after them. You can select exactly what you want to hear around you. You can pan it and things like that if you want to move up to stereo in-ears. There's no change in mix as you move across the stage or whatever. If you're a band or an act that involves a lot of movement on stage, moving across the stage, your mix stays with you. It doesn't matter if you move out of the line of sight of your 4x12 and suddenly you can't hear yourself. None of that's a problem. You take it with you. Another massive advantage that in-ear monitors afford you as a band, if you're all on in-ears, is the ability to run clicks, tracks, cues, and talkback. Now, talkback out of those is possibly the most useful thing. It allows you to talk to your band on stage using a microphone that is private of the audience, and this is useful in a lot of ways. When I was in a function band regularly, I used to call the songs and we'd have requests and the set would change, What it allowed me to do is talk to all the band to cue off the next song before the last one finished, and everything looked really slick. Much more slick than shouting across the stage. Someone's got to take their in-ears out to listen to you. The other thing is, if you've got a dep on stage, you can cue them or even shout chords if you really had to. And if you're a musical director, if anything goes wrong on a gig, you can sort of give people help, call people out if something's going wrong. It's a really useful thing to have to keep the show looking as slick as possible. Quite honestly, if you spend the time getting used to in-ears and dialing them in, it's the best sound you're going to have live. I'm testament to this. I was always kind of against in-ears and then got into it, and it took me some time to get used to them. But if you spend some real time persevering and dialing it in and making adjustments to your personal situation to get the best out of them, it really is worth it, and added benefit of not losing your hearing. So with all of that said, it is a big change for us guitarists to move over to in-ear monitors. And there's a few things that I've picked up that have really helped me get mine dialed in. So I want to share those with you now. First of all, dial in the amp sounds that you're going to use on stage, be it digital or with your amp, having your in-ears in. It's a very different experience being in the room and then putting your in-ears in. You can't expect them to sound exactly the same. In my experience, you're much better getting a sound that you're happy with in your in-ears that maybe sacrifices a tiny bit what the front of house is getting, because we're very picky about our guitar sound out front, but 90% of the public isn't super picky. Obviously, there's bad and good guitar sounds out there, but I've found it's much better to be happy with what I'm getting in my ears, because I will play better and perform better if I'm not fighting against the sound. So I strongly recommend dialing in your tones with your in-ears in if you're planning on gigging exclusively with in-ears. Kind of on the same path as the last point, if you rehearse with a show or with a band, use your in-ear monitors. Get your mixes dialed in rehearsals all together. You can't expect to just, at rehearsals, everyone's just blasting their amps, and then you get to a gig, put your ears in. It's going to be a totally different experience. Spending that time in rehearsals, getting everything dialed in as much as possible will really, really help, rather than scrounging around at a gig. Obviously, that's not always possible. If you're depping on a show and things, it's never always possible. Doing festivals is a nightmare. But if you're in a position where you're going to be using a consistent gear with consistent players, rehearse with them in, just get used to the experience and get that mix dialed in as good as you possibly can. Now, out of all the musicians I talk to, guitarists seems to be the ones that have the hardest time switching to in-ear monitors. And I think often people switch to in-ears when they go digital, and that's what ultimately puts them off going digital. And I think really the biggest reason is stage volume. We are so used to that interaction between the amp and our guitars, and when you take that away, you really do lose something. We're so used to that, and I can completely relate, because when I moved up to a slightly bigger touring role, I decided to go to the Kemper for consistency and stage volume, and I started with in-ear monitors straight away and had no cab on stage, and I just felt very disconnected. So what I did for my own personal situation is I got myself a head rush monitor that I use on stage for stage volume. I can catch feedback, there's air moving, and it's amazing how little stage volume it takes for that feeling to come back. It just fills everything out. I have a friend of mine, Claudio, if you're watching this, mate, and he was struggling a bit with his Helix, and I recommended grab one of those head rush things and just give it a go. And he is much happier now that he has that on stage and he can catch that feedback and things. So if you're going digital, I recommend still having some form of stage volume. Again, you'd be surprised how little you need to get that feeling. A lot of people still use a cab on stage, absolutely fine. The in-ear thing is supposed to augment what you're doing, not take away from it, in my opinion. If you're someone that's sticking with a real amp and going to in-ear monitors, I would perhaps recommend looking at some kind of IR solution to place between your head and cab on stage, because that way every single time you stick your in-ears in, you're going to have the same sound. A lot of people struggle. If you're putting a mic on a cab, depending on where you place it on any given night, that sound is going to change and may not be all that desirable. So that would be my recommendation. Of course, your mileage may vary, and I'm sure you can get pretty good results with a mic if you're careful. Something that helped me massively with in-ears is actually moving to a stereo in-ear monitor mix. It won't always be possible. It depends on your setup and also how much money you want to spend. but having stereo allows you to place things across the stereo field, and it really opens up the mix and stops you feeling claustrophobic when you've got your in-ears in. Gives everything its own separation and space. If you like the drums panned, or if you like to hear where people are on stage so it doesn't feel disconcerting, it's a massive advantage. As a guitarist, I would also recommend running your rig in stereo if you do this. I run my Kemper in stereo, and it's not really for the audience, to be honest with you. They do pan it front of house, but it's for me, because when you've got those ears in and stuff's panned hard left and hard right, you suddenly gain all this space, especially with stereo effects like reverbs, delays and choruses. It's a much better experience. Another thing I experimented with that was quite cool was using a different IR left and right. So if you're using a modeler, sending a different speaker to each side, and it just opened things up because they reacted a bit differently and gave everything a bit of dimension, and again, a little bit less claustrophobic. If you're struggling with that kind of claustrophobic feeling with your in-ears or feeling a bit isolated, try adding some reverb, a bit of room reverb to your whole mix, or cranking up the reverb on the drums or the vocal mics that will then pick up some stage bleed. It just opens everything up. Even when you're playing in quite a dead room, there's still that room sound. So you can kind of simulate that with your in-ears using a little touch of reverb, or adding a bit more reverb than you normally would on your guitar, because it'll probably get lost at front of house, but for you it'll make it feel a little bit more like it's in the room. One really common complaint for guitarists moving to in-ear monitors is they stick a mic on their amp, put their in-ears in, and wonder why it sounds so tinny and so thin compared to their amp when they take their ears out. Now, the biggest thing for that is mic choice and mic placement. You're possibly a guitarist that's never thought about what mic you're sticking on your amp before, or the placement of it. But if you stick your in-ears in and move that mic around the cone, you'll soon see that that makes a massive difference. In the center of the cone, very bright. To the outside of the cone, very dull. It's finding that sweet spot and finding a mic that works for you and your in-ears. Equally, if you've gone digital, finding the perfect IR, so the speaker and mic combination, will be the key to getting a sound in your in-ears that you are really happy with. Spend some time experimenting with your personal in-ears. Depending on the price and the type of in-ears, they vary wildly in their sort of sonic signature, their built-in EQ. So you may find that with one set of in-ears something is great and with another set they're not. One of the biggest things that has helped me is the addition of room mics or ambient mics. On bigger gigs, our techs often put out audience mics, crowd mics facing outwards so we can hear the crowd, but you also get the room sound. This is the PA bouncing off the back wall, and that really opens things up. I've even on smaller gigs experimented with just placing a mic facing across the band just to pick up the room, the sound of the band, and compressing that a little bit or adding a bit of reverb, again, really opens things up. So it depends on logistics for you, but it's doable even on a smaller stage. If you're in a band where you're all agreed on what the setup is and you've tested it in advance, just putting a mic out that you can blend in and out just for that kind of ambient sound, it's really helped me, and I imagine it will help you too if you are feeling like that. So that was my guitarist guide to in-ear monitors. I do hope you found it helpful. These are tips that have really helped me. If you haven't subscribed to this channel already, please look at doing so. It really helps push this channel forward and keeps you making this kind of content. Whatever you're doing with the rest of your day, I hope it's great. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below, and I'll see you again in the next video. Cheers, guys.